Hello, everyone. We have another lecture in Drug Society and Human Behavior today. This is Chapter 13, the opioids. And once again, I'm doing this in my garage, so you may hear traffic noise from the street, but it's a lot better than hearing my romantic cat singing love songs all over the house, poor thing. Anyway, she could use some opioids, as a matter of fact. Anyway, I'm gonna share my screen with you, and we're gonna jump right in. Drug Society and Human Behavior, Chapter 13, the opioids. Arose by any other name. You say tomato, I say tomato. So what's the difference between an opiate and an opioid? There is a significant difference, and that difference is that an opiate is a naturally occurring substance, and it's derived from this little bulb here. This plant is Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy. And if you extract a narcotic from this poppy, then what you have is an opiate. If you have an opioid, you're looking at something that's either synthetic or partially synthetic, a derivative of this. It can be based on the molecular structure of the opium poppy, but if it's not extracted from it, then that compound is a synthetic compound. If you tinker with the extract of this plant and add things to it and take things away from it, etc., then you have a semi-synthetic analog, such as heroin is a semi-synthetic analog of the poppy. And this is where the magic begins. The opium poppy is scored, and when you score it, you put shallow cuts on the bulb, like over here, and it bleeds a white sap, and that sap turns yellow and then brown as it dries. The dried sap here on the knife blade. And that, dear hearts, is raw opium. And you can eat it, you can smoke it, you can add it to other things, dissolve it in alcohol and drink it, all kinds of cool things with it. You may recognize this scene up here with Dorothy and the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion, and the Tin Man, along with Toto, of course, are crossing a field as they're reaching the Emerald City. It's the last thing they do before they get to the Emerald City, as a matter of fact. And while they're crossing it, they get sleepy and they fall down in the field to take a nap. And Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion do anyway, and Toto. The Tin Man and the Scarecrow do not, for a very good reason. They're a Tin Man and a Scarecrow. They don't have basic lungs and things like that, right? Circulatory systems. So the living creatures fall down, the animal creatures fall down, but the material creatures don't. In the book, they pick Dorothy up and they carry her away and lay her by a river where the breeze blowing off of the river revives her after a while. But in the movie, they run around screaming for help, and Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, hears them and sends a snowfall to wake them up, which is kind of an inside joke because snow at the time was a street name for heroin, and it won't wake you up. Anyway, since we're talking about stories, once upon a time in Greece, there was a fella who was the king of Ithaca. His name was Odysseus, the son of pain, the man of anger, the persecuted man, who was a draft dodger. I thought that was pretty cool. He was the first draft dodger in literature I ever run across. When Greece got into a scuffle with Troy, and Agamemnon and Menelaus came to get all the other Greek kings to help them wage war against Ilium, against Troy. Odysseus tried to pretend like he was crazy, and he was plowing the beach and sowing salt like he was planting corn, and trying to get a Section 8 on the deal. And one of his fellow kings put his young child Telemachus down in the furrow in front of him, where if he went any further he'd trample his baby. And he pulled up. He wasn't that crazy after all. Anyway, Odysseus goes to war. It takes them 10 years to defeat the Trojans in that war. But Troy finally falls. And Odysseus has pissed off one of the gods. Which one? This one. And Poseidon, the god of the sea, Neptune's the Greek will call, the Romans will call him, but Neptune was pulling for the Trojans, and Odysseus was pulling for the Greeks. He was one of them, and so when the war was over and the walls fell, and Odysseus started for home, it took him 10 years from the fall of Troy to get back to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, who was now a young man in his early 20s. Along the way, Poseidon kept doing mean things to Odysseus. Here are the sirens. They sang and lured sailors to their deaths on the rocks. And all of Odysseus's men have beeswax in their ears, and they're pulling. Odysseus had himself lashed to the mast where he couldn't escape, and so he could hear the siren song, so that he would know what it was like. So he's a bold guy too, right? What's this got to do with narcotics? Well, we're coming to that. One of the places he went was to the island of the Lotus Eaters, and on the way, when he was having all of these journeys, he landed on the island of Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and he blinded the Cyclops, who was a cannibal and was eating his men, and Odysseus figured out a way to blind him, and they escaped. And he went to the island of Circe, the witch, who turned all of his men into pigs, which actually, from a feminist reading of that story, wasn't much of a trick. And then he wound up on the island of the Lotus Eaters. And on the island of the Lotus Eaters, it's an interesting story, because these people here are like a pre-Christian hippie commune. They sat around all day and ate lotus blossoms and tripped on them and grooved on one another and whatnot. They didn't do anything bad or evil, but they didn't have much in the way of ambition either. They were all very chill and perfectly happy with what they were doing. Odysseus sent his men in to get supplies, and they didn't come back. They fell in with the Lotus Eaters and were also content just to let life slide by while they sat there mellowed out. Narcotics users have been referred to as children of the Lotus Eaters from time to time, and for that very reason. When they're fixed, they don't give anyone any trouble. The people who are prone to doing this, they shoot up, they fall out, they nod, they eat their pills, they fall asleep on the couch, this kind of thing. They may give you a little more trouble when they run out of dope, but while they're under the influence, they're not prone to giving people problems. Opium was well known in the time of Homer And this references to the lotus eaters may have also been a reference to the opium cakes that were prevalent in the region at the time. And you could get them on feast days and holy days, and I don't think they had weekends back then, but you could get them. So there were references in both the Iliad and the Odyssey to the use of these types of drugs. Galen wrote about it. So did Hippocrates and a whole bunch of other physicians, and a long line of great Greek physicians. Is written about in ancient Chinese medicine. It led to wars between Britain and China. It influenced writers, Robert Louis Stevenson, Edgar Allan Poe, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, John Cates, and many others. And opium is the mother drug of all opiates and many semi-synthetic opioids. So you can say basically that opium is the mother drug of the narcotics. The Opium Wars occurred when China and Britain went to war in 1834. Britain was selling opium in China, and the Chinese objected to this. And China tried to stop this practice. They seized a bunch of British opium and burned it. And for 2 years, Britain waged war against the Chinese, largely naval battles. There weren't many land battles, although that's what's depicted here. China failed because Britain had a much superior navy. And by strength of a greater navy, they beat China down, and they also got Hong Kong. That's how they got Hong Kong, and it became British. But Britain won and continued to sell opium in China until the dawn of the 20th century. It was like in the 1890s when they finally got around to stopping their trade in opium, which again is kind of racist. You get racism mixed up in both national policy and foreign policy. The British, like the Americans, didn't see anything wrong with selling opium to Chinese. I mean, they were Chinese, right? What's the big deal? It's not like they're white folks or anything. And so that was a piece of that attitude that actually still kind of exists today. The writers that were influenced by the opiates, knew about opiates and used opiates. One of them was Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and y'all may have been forced to read some of his work, particularly Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So they used to teach that in 9th grade literature. You'd have to read something, Romeo and Juliet, something from Shakespeare, and something from the Romance poets and Coleridge. And his poem Xanadu opens with the lines, "In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a mighty pleasure dome decree." And this is the mighty pleasure dome that was decreed in this painting by Dmitry Smirnov. And it ends after taking you on a rollicking and vaguely sexual trip through this mighty pleasure dome, through rocks and Russian rivers and stuff like that. You finally get to the end of the poem where the narrator tells you about this traveler. "So weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes in holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed, and drank the milk of paradise." And that, dear hearts, is the milk of paradise. That's some pretty good milk, huh? Robert Louis Stevenson, Edgar Allan Poe, they had their rounds with addiction with laudanum, which is a tincture of alcohol and opium mixed together, as did Coleridge. Coleridge, in fact, with his poem Xanadu, said he meant to make it longer and he had more things to write about, but the mailman delivered the mail and he got up and chatted with him at the door, and when he got back to writing, he forgot. It happens. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a tale of addiction. The strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, from the guy who wrote, Treasure Island. This is about a struggle with addiction. Dr. Jekyll is a good, decent, honest man who cares about his fellows, who tries to be a good citizen, all of that good stuff. And he invents a potion that releases the evil side of man's nature. And when he takes this, he becomes Edward Hyde. And when he becomes Edward Hyde, he's a monster. And I don't mean he's a werewolf peeing on fire plugs and chasing mailmen down the road. He is a monster, a human being who has absolutely no concern for other human beings. He tramples a toddler who walks out in front of him and never stops. He beats a woman with a cane. He assaults men on a regular basis. He drinks too much. He uses drugs. He's a horrible person. And when the potion wears off and Hyde reverts back to Dr. Jekyll is tortured by the knowledge of what he was and what he was doing. And he resolves never again to do that, never to use that formula again, never to experiment in this way again, except you know what he does? Yeah, you guessed it. He does. Over and over again. And he does it over and over again because he can't stop. He cannot stop what he's doing. And it leads to his downfall. Pure addiction. Poe's Black Cat actually begins with on page 1 with asking what disease is like alcohol. And he's a drinker. And he gets into doing some other things too. This is a pretty nice guy. He's a married guy. He's got a nice cat. He's good to his cat. But as he slips into his addiction, he begins to be suspicious of both the wife and the cat. He's going a little bit crazy and drinking way too much and using other drugs as well. One day, he blinds the cat, pokes out one of its eyes. You can see the one-eyed cat there. And now the cat's terrified of him and doesn't want to have anything to do with him. And he believes that the cat, with his one good eye, is watching him all the time. So he hangs the cat. And then he has a one-eyed black cat show up on his doorstep, and it's got a noose marking on its neck, like the noose that he used to hang the original cat. He murders his wife. That's a hand axe sticking out of the top of her head. He throws her into the wall, and he walls her up so that nobody will be able to find her. But he keeps hearing this noise, and it's a yowling and a howling. And he realized that he's walled the cat up in the wall with his wife. And when the police come there, he's breaking out the door to get the cat out, to kill the cat, when he's arrested. Very macabre. Poe's kind of a twisted guy when it comes to writing, but he's a good writer and wrote the world's first detective story, in case you're interested in that sort of thing. Murders in the Room work. But that's about a man's slide into substance dependency and into a subsequent degeneracy that he can't control either. Opium, the drug itself, the raw drug without any kind of derivative, without any kind of tincture, is also something that we're familiar with. This is an opium den. in San Francisco, actually. People go, oh, that's in China. No, that was shot in San Francisco, where among Chinese immigrants who brought their pipe smoking habit with them. And in the 1700s, around 1704, somewhere around in there, it was a little later than that, we got a nursery rhyme out of the deal. And the nursery rhyme was about a king. Old King Cole was a merry old soul, and a merry old soul was he. So he called for his pipe, and he called for his bowl, and he called for his fiddlers three. Wonder what that bowl is, huh? I have a guess. It's probably the same stuff that the Chinese are smoking over here in San Francisco. And that'll make you kind of merry when you're perked up enough to be that way. The practice of smoking opium was fairly widespread by this time in Europe and in China and into the Americas by now too, because it became in vogue when we had our first big Chinese wave of immigration in the 1800s, and this was fairly common. Oh, by the way, that's that pipe. That's also where we get the expression pipe dreams, which are the wonderful things that you're going to do and you never get around to because you're in your pipe and they come out of your pipe. Good plans, but a good plan isn't much if you don't execute it, is it? In 1806, Friedrich Sertiner isolated morphine, and he named it after Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams, because morphine puts you in a dreamlike state, just like opium does, just like codeine does, just like heroin does, just like fentanyl does. Codeine is another extract. It's an opiate because it comes directly from the poppy. In fact, codeine is a Greek word that means poppy head, which, by the way, is another slang term for narcotic addict, is a poppy head. Then there was a triumph of technology. Francis Rand and the hypodermic syringe. This was invented around 1844 in Ireland. The Irish physician Francis Rand developed this particular technology, and it changed the way we use drugs forever. And that's the truth. Alexander Wood often gets credit for this, but he came up with his device some 10 years later in mid-1850s, and there was a French physician who came up with their version around that time as well. So this was, up until this point, you either drank, ate, inserted, or smoked your drug. There wasn't any other way to do it. But now, Sertiner has been able to extract morphine, and we've got a drug that you can put into one of these and inject directly into a vein, directly into the bloodstream, bypass digestion, bypass any kind of liver enzymes that might be affecting the intensity of the intoxication event, and boom, you're right there. During this, there were some political events that took place around the time of the invention of the hypodermic syringe, soon after the invention of the hypodermic syringe, and the Franco-Prussian War in Europe, where a lot of people, big slaughterhouse, American Civil War, big slaughterhouse, more Americans died in the American Civil War than in any other war we've ever fought in. And the reason for that, of course, is there were Americans on both sides. And then there was the Spanish-American War, which was a very odd war where we lost more soldiers to disease than we did to Spanish bullets. But addiction to narcotics after the American Civil War, and to some degree after the Spanish-American War, was so prevalent that narcotics addiction came to be known as the soldier's disease. They had you had field hospitals that were set up at the battlefields for the wounded soldiers who were carried in after getting hit with a mini ball or something, and they evaluated the soldiers on the spot. And the truth of the matter is, if you were hit in the guts or in the head or something like that, there wasn't much that could be done for you anyway. And they took you off to the side and made you comfortable and let you die. If you were hit in the arm or the foot or the hand or the leg, they'd treat it. If it went through and through, if it hit a bone, that's another thing. There was no such thing as a flesh wound, by the way. A mini ball is a big chunk of lead traveling at high velocity. And when it hits you, it shatters bone. It tears holes. It does terrible things to a body that's hit by this weapon. So it's, the minor wounds were kind of, I don't know. that was a very subjective and iffy concept. But if you were hit in the leg and you had a shattered bone, we'd take you into the hospital, to the field hospital here, and throw you up on a surgical table and have 3 or 4 big orderlies hold you down while a surgeon went to work on you with a bone saw. That's after anesthesia, right? Wrong. We didn't have anesthesia, and we didn't have anything to put you down for the surgeries. When you got a surgery, it was a big deal because you were there for it. So that's the way that went. You can do your own research online and stuff, but you can see field hospitals in the American Civil War where arms and legs are stacked out behind the tents up as high as your head, big piles of human being parts. They would seal this wound with a hot iron to cauterize the blood vessels so it wouldn't bleed anymore. If you didn't die from shock or from blood loss, chances are pretty good you're going to die from infection. But now we have morphine, and we can put this morphine into a needle and shoot it into you, and it ameliorates your pain. You're still hurt. You know that the pain's there. You just don't much care anymore, as it creates a dissociative experience of it. It doesn't hurt. You're still injured, but it doesn't hurt, not in the way that we would need to hurt to suffer. So people stopped screaming after you shot them up with morphine. But they'd start screaming again when the morphine wore off, so you shoot them up again. And then you shoot them up again, you shoot them up again. And then after a while, it's like the guy is screaming, but his leg shouldn't be hurting like that anymore. What's up with that? And he's not really screaming because of the pain from the wound. He's screaming because of the pain of the withdrawal, because it feels horrible to withdraw from narcotics. So let's give it to babies, okay? If you got a sleepless baby, use laudanum. Laudanum's a poison. These products that were manufactured around that time, Miss Winslow's soothing syrup and that kind of stuff. Some of these were called gripe water. You give them to cranky babies, and babies that wouldn't go to sleep, and babies that fussed too much, and babies that had colic and which stomach ache. And they're also it's also good for pain relief, yellow fever, cardiac disease, colds, dysentery, excessive secretions. They're not specific on excessive secretions, but if you've ever been an abuser of pain medications, for instance, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You don't go to the bathroom properly when you're taking this stuff. You tend to be constipated. And people who are using these type of medications resort to laxatives and enemas and things like that to try to have BMs. So laudanum was also given to people who had consumption, what we call today tuberculosis, like this guy over here on the right. That's Doc Holliday. With Big Nose Kate Horney, Mary Catherine Horney, who outlived him by a long time. She lived to, till she was nearly she was around 90 years old when she died. It was a pretty good run for a prostitute and a saloon girl. But anyway. So Big Nose Kate survived Doc, who had consumption and was also a laudanum addict, as was Wyatt Earp's first wife, and a bunch of others of the time. Laudanum addiction was fairly common among people who took these types of medications. And it was believed around the time that, prior to the Harrison Act of 1914, that most people who were addicted to narcotics got addicted to them through a physician or through a doctor or through an apothecary or because they had a certain illness. John Wayne's last film was called The Shootist, and it was made in 1976, and the title came from the character whose name I can't remember now. Was being interviewed by a newspaper journalist wanted to interview him and introduced himself as a journalist, and John Wayne kind of smirked at him and said, "Well, yeah, I'm a shootist," But he's one of the last of the old gunfighters, and he's dying of cancer, and he organizes a gunfight where he can be shot down, and and not have to go out the bad way, the way of cancer. And he visits a doctor, and the doctor tells him, he said, "Well, you got a cancer." And he said, "Well, what can I do about it?" And the doctor said, "You can't do anything about it. It's going to kill you." And he said, "Well, how long do I have?" And he said, "I'm not sure. Maybe a year or two, something like that. Maybe months. I don't know." But here's some laudanum, gives him the bottle. And he says, if the pain gets bad, take a couple of swigs of it. And he said, if it gets real bad, drink it all. So that was the doctor's advice. And that was laudanum. Laudanum was something that was probably the primary narcotic addiction in the United States by the time the Harrison Act was passed. And it was something that women took a lot of for female problems, menstrual cramps, that kind of thing, and became addicted to it because they took so much of it. And you too, Betty? Yep. And the old man of the mountain, the old man sings to Betty, "You have to sing my song if you're gonna do me wrong. You gotta kick the gong to get along with me." I can't sing very well, but that's roughly the tune. And kicking the gong is smoking opium. And Betty says, "I can dig it." And so she was perfectly okay with smoking opium. Later on, the same two characters, Betty Boop and a cleverly disguised Cab Calloway, are in Minnie the Moocher. She was a low-down hoochie coocher. She was the roughest, toughest frail, but Minnie had a heart as big as a whale. But there was one line in there that talks about her relationship, because she hung around with a guy named Smokey. She loved him, though he was cokey. He took her down to Chinatown and showed her how to kick the gong around. So lots of drug references in Betty Boop. I watched all these cartoons when I was a kid. No wonder I turned out kind of weird. I think it's important And we should remember that the poppy is also a flower, and it's a beautiful flower. It's a very pretty flower. The effects of the milk of the opium plant, the opium is what puts you to sleep. It's not necessarily the pollen, but that's something that's been kind of mythologized over the years. After World War I, the poppy became a symbol of the war dead and a symbol of veterans in general. I can still remember, donating to veterans groups and things like that. And they'll give you a little card that says, I donated and a poppy to pin onto your jacket or your shirt or blouse or whatever. Anyway, it became a symbol after a poem was written about it. And Flanders Fields was written by Major John McCrae. He was a doctor and a surgeon. He was with the 1st Canadian Contingent and published, and his poem was published in Punch magazine in December 1915. And it was written about a battle that was fought in April of that same year, which was the Second Battle of Ypres in West Flanders, Belgium. And he treated wounded men here, and it was in this battle where gas was used for the first time in World War I, which was a horrible, horrible, horrible weapon. And after presiding over the funeral of a close friend who died in that battle, and it's over here, and you can read that yourselves. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the lark still bravely singing fly, scarce heard among the guns below. And he's writing it in the voice of the dead. But the reference to the poppies, again, if ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. And again, the reference to the poppies causing sleep. It can if you get the opium out of them, but just the flowers, nah. Post-Harrison Act. For most of U.S. history, narcotic addiction was not a crime. After the Harrison Act, it became one. Narcotic drugs were once cheap and readily available. You could get them at the corner apothecary. You could get them through the mail from Sears and Roebuck's. You could even get injection kits with your name monogrammed or your initials monogrammed on it. And it was legal. It wasn't something that everybody did or that, was widely accepted as, a social convention, but it wasn't condemned or looked down upon to the degree that we do it today. A black market sprang up to meet the need once that these drugs were made illegal, and a black market raised the price. And so what was a few cents a day to maintain your addiction now suddenly became quite expensive and illegal. And you had to get it from the black market. You couldn't go to a guy down on the corner that you've traded with for 20 years, Then came heroin. You know what a heroine is, right? It's the lady hero. It's a good name. And I've just noted that she looks a little bit like Miss Israel from a few years back. Actually, it was a long time back. I think it was 2004 when she was Miss Israel. But heroin, the drug, was originally brought to us by Bayer Labs in Germany and presented as a miracle drug. It was supposed to be a real effective replacement for morphine. And, we'd already discovered that there are problems with morphine, like overdosing and, fairly serious addiction. But here this girl comes in, the lady hero named heroin, and usually coming to you in a clear liquid or a white powder. And so you got street names for it, like lady or girl, white girl, or horse. Use white horse and then horse. And it's got a lot of other names too, skag, and you name it. Its chemical name is diacetylmorphine, also known as heroin. It's two acetyl substituents, which and a substituent is an atom that replaces a hydrogen. Is some other type of atom that replaces a hydrogen atom on the morphine molecule. And so you put two of those substituents on the morphine molecule, displace two hydrogen atoms, and you come up with heroin. And it was introduced, as I said, as a miracle drug that is safer, more effective, and less addictive than morphine. And of course, it isn't. Well, it is more effective, but it isn't safer or less addictive. In fact, it's more dangerous and more addictive. But plus, when you do heroin, diacetylmorphine, and your body begins to break it down, the first stage metabolite is an active metabolite that carries quite a punch in itself. The first stage metabolite of heroin is morphine. So then you get this more bang for your buck. Factoid: since heroin is a German drug, the first heroin addicts were, come on now, were Germans who bought their drug ein Schmeck, a taste at a time. It's from the German verb schmecken, to taste, which is where heroin came by its American street name of smack, not because it smacks you hard or smacks you down or anything like that, but from smack. Was wollen Sie hier, Fräulein? What do you want here, miss? And she responds, Ich brauche einen Schmeck. I need a taste. Anyway, it's something that you can tell your friends when you're sitting around just chatting about stuff. Narcotic drugs are both opiate and opioid. Opium, codeine, and morphine are opiate. They're organic. They're extracted from Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy. But human beings also produce our own neuropeptides that are opioids too. They're opiates too. You know what? I hesitate to really say that, because they're kind of like on a cusp between opiate and opioid. There's nothing synthetic about endorphins and enkephalins. They're naturally produced from us, but they don't come from an opium source. So they're not properly opiate, but they're not properly opioid either. But they bind at the same molecules, at the same receptor sites in our brains where opiate molecules and opioid molecules bind. So we have these ourselves. Our bodies regulate the production of the neurotransmitters, as we've talked about before. If I'm injecting heroin, if I'm smoking opium, if I'm eating a lot of oxycodone or whatever, my body is experiencing this as an overabundance of these substances in my system, and the control gland, the pituitary gland, will probably regulate my production down so that I'm not manufacturing endorphins and enkephalins, which is okay as long as I keep using whatever it is I'm using. But when I stop using whatever it is that I'm using and I start experiencing withdrawal syndrome, these can be experienced as something that are very, very, very pronounced. If you look at someone who's withdrawing from narcotics, it looks like they're having an episode of the flu. They're shaking and they're cold and they've got goosebumps on them and they're having hot flashes and throwing up and having diarrhea and their bones hurt and they feel miserable. And I can look at them and go, okay, that's the flu. That's horrible. Go to bed. Here, drink some orange juice, some water, take some aspirin, keep warm. It'll pass in a few days. And it will. It'll pass in a few days. But during that period of time, you're going to be in misery. And if I'm telling that to someone with the flu who's not addicted to narcotics, one thing that's true, that I know to be true, is that that individual produce their own neuropeptides, the endorphins and enkephalins, which mediate the pain that they're experiencing from their symptomology. If, however, they're having these same symptomologies and withdrawing from narcotics, they're experiencing that without benefits of any mediation whatsoever. So their endorphins aren't there, the enkephalins aren't there, there's depletions in other neurotransmitters that are necessary, dang, there I am. And I gotta quit touching my keyboard when I'm talking. I'm working on that. And I forgot where I was. But anyway, so they're experiencing a more pronounced pain than they would otherwise. It's like flu times 10 on their end of it, where they're experiencing it. Anyway, opiates may turn into opioids and may be I didn't finish that sentence. Opiates become opioids when they're semi-synthetic, like heroin, or fully synthetic, like fentanyl. A little aside on the opioid discussion. I want you to know the difference between an opiate and an opioid, but in conversation with damn near anyone this side of a pharmacist, they don't make a distinction. They'll use opiate, opioid interchangeably all day long. And so it's kind of like, in terms of actual communication, unless you're doing something technical, it doesn't much matter which term you use. I like to be as precise as possible in using the terms, so I'm a little weird that way. My inner nerd's coming out. Narcotics are prescribed in the United States of America as pain relievers, and they're good ones. They're analgesics. They're a blessing to human beings. Man, they alleviate a ton of pain and suffering every day for people who would just be in misery without them. Can these people become addicted to them? Yes. Can they overdose on them? Yes. But oddly enough, narcotic pain relievers aren't as hard on your body as some of the other drugs people get addicted to. They're nowhere near as rough on your body as alcohol. If you're an alcoholic, for instance, and have a long-term 20-year drinking habit versus someone who has a 20-year pain pill habit, the person with the pain pill habit is usually going to be in better physical shape overall than the person who has the drinking habit. And these drugs don't impact all the organ systems that alcohol does. If you're shooting them, that's another thing. There's lifestyle risks that are associated with that. Transmission of diseases, unsterile products, collapsed veins, abscesses, a whole bunch of things that could go wrong there. They're also prescribed as cough suppressants, antitussive, promethazine syrup, for instance. And they are antidiarrheals. We talked about that a while ago, that they're, that if you have a pain pill habit or a heroin habit, you probably also are fairly familiar with constipation. In Cuba, remember that war that we had? Where more people died from diseases than Spanish bullets. We had two really bad diseases, but we came up with a cure for those two bad diseases, or a very effective treatment for those two bad diseases during that same period of time. One of the diseases was malaria. And we came up with quinine, which is an extract. It's an organic substance. It's an extract from the fever tree, from the bark of the fever tree, and it's used to treat malaria, which has, fever along with it. It's the great grandfather of hydroxychloroquine, by the way, the quinine drug. And hydroxychloroquine has replaced it as a better and more effective treatment for malaria. It's also been repurposed for treating lupus, and just recently has been considered as being repurposed for treating COVID, but it hasn't proven to be that effective. The other was the narcotics. And narcotics, we already knew you could use them for pain, for people who were injured on the battlefield. You could use them, in such a way as you could ease someone's suffering if you had to do something, like under field conditions to stop bleeding or to sew up a wound or whatever. But we discovered that they would also treat dysentery. And dysentery is like super diarrhea, and it kills people. They dehydrate and lose blood. They're passing blood, basically. They've gone to the bathroom so much there's nothing left. People die from it. But the administration of narcotics not only eased the pain, and it's a very painful condition to have and to pass from, but it also stopped the symptomologies, which was the super diarrhea, the dysentery itself, which is usually amoebic in nature. It was something you got from a parasite. Anyway, there's some concerns with using the narcotics for any of these conditions. One has to do with a quick tolerance buildup that requires increasingly more of the drug, and that becomes a problem for a person who's using it. If you're using narcotics to treat pain conditions that are anything like chronic, where you have to take them over a protracted period of time, you're probably going to become addicted to them, because that's frankly how you get addicted to them. But you build a tolerance, and you have to take more and more and more. Now, with most of these, with the organic with opioids, the organic ones, your tolerance will build and build along, and so will your tolerance for the effect of the drug will build and build, but so will your tolerance for the lethal dosage of the drug. So that over time you can build up a pretty enormous habit with the amount of the substance that you can take without overdosing, without dying. Now, depending on the substance, that can create a whole new set of problems for you. If your drug of choice, or the drug that you're using most often, is Vicodin, Vicodin has a lot of acetaminophen in it. And acetaminophen is hard on your liver. So if you're abusing the Vicodin, it's not the opiate that's in the pill that's probably going to kill you. It's the Tylenol that's in the pill that's likely going to kill you, or cause liver damage and liver malfunction, that sort of thing. Fentanyl is a synthetic one. If you're taking fentanyl, and it doesn't take much fentanyl to take you out, by the way, but if you're doing China White, the form of fentanyl, your tolerance will build. You'll have to take more of the drug as far as achieving an effect, but your lethal dosage tolerance won't rise at all. It'll be static. So going in, if fentanyl's your drug of choice, you're going to take one fine day. You're going to wake up and take enough, you'll die, and you're just trying to get enough in you to get high. So that's a risk. There's a high risk of overdose with any street drug that's a downer, a central nervous system type depressant, or a narcotic. One thing is you don't know anything about the purity of the substance, and you can get it's been 10 years, maybe more than that, when some really good Nigerian heroin come to town, and you had people all over Houston falling out from overdose. And what they did is they took a regular shot of the drug of the purity that they're used to, 6, 7, 8%, and mixed it up with that in mind. But then when they shot that amount of this 12, 13, 15% heroin, it was twice the dosage of what they were used to, and they fell out like flies, and 17 people died in one weekend with that going on. So there's a high risk of overdose related to purity, also related to being intoxicated, not knowing how much you've taken. There's a high addiction potential with these drugs. They feel good, and anything that feels good is reinforcing for us to do it again and again and again and again. And there's a nasty withdrawal. And that nasty withdrawal is a very, very strong negative reinforcement to keep people using narcotics, because we don't want to get sick. We know what that feels like, and we don't want to go through it again. Naloxone is a drug that is a narcotic antagonist. And what a narcotic antagonist does, what this particular narcotic antagonist does, is I had to sneeze. Something in my garage made me do that. And I've been fighting that off for like 10 minutes. You may have heard that in my voice, but I just lost. It's a narcotic antagonist that displaces opiates and opioids at the receptor sites. There's opioid receptor sites in the brain. That's where the enkephalins and the endorphins are naturally produced. Opioids bind. And it's where the ones that we take in from outside also bind and create their effect. The naloxone has a greater affinity for those for those receptors than the narcotics do. And what that means is that when I inject narcotics into a vein, it goes to that receptor site and it displaces the narcotic. It kicks it off. It won't let it occupy. And the Narcan, which is the brand name for naloxone, will bind on the receptor. And that's all it does. It binds. It doesn't fire anything, doesn't do anything. It just sits there. But it sits there and won't let the opioids bind at the receptor, so they can't have any effect. If someone's down and you, I'll stop here a minute and say that I've placed some clips in your course room that you can look at. There's 2 of them from film, Train Spotting, that has the opening scene that introduces the characters who are going to be playing and kind of sets the stage for the hows and the whys of heroin addiction among these characters. And then there's another scene in there that I posted in your classroom called Renton's OD. And if you want to see these and you're not in my class, you're watching this video for some other reason, somehow or another, you can go to YouTube and type in Renton's OD Train Spotting. It'll take you straight there. Or you can type in intro scene Train Spotting. It'll take you right there. There's another one that you can look at, how to use Narcan. And that's also posted in the classroom, but you can go to YouTube, how to use Narcan. I love YouTube. It teaches you everything. How to use Narcan, and it'll take you straight to a site that where there's a bunch of videos that are showing you how to use nasal and injectable Narcan, naloxone, to reverse this. But in any case, this is a drug that you can keep at hand in case of emergency. I've got doses of it in my office in case someone should need it. And you can go get it at your local drugstores. There's an open prescription. Anyone in America can buy this stuff, no questions asked. And you can get Narcan. And if you are addicted to pain medications, it may be a good thing to have around. Or if you have someone in your family who's had a problem with addiction to this type of thing. Because if they're down, this can reverse it. In Renton's OD, train spotting, you can go look at that as soon as you want to. He's at Reverend Mother's, which is another character in the film, and he injects some heroin and he ODs. So Reverend Mother drags him downstairs, puts him in a taxi cab, and the taxi cab takes him to the emergency room at a hospital and drops him off in front of their doors in the parking lot and takes off. They carry a man on a gurney, and the nurse tries to wake him up, slapping his face, doing all the kind of things that you do to wake someone up who's, OD'd or whatever. And she can't, and she injects a liquid solution into his arm. And just a few seconds after she injects the liquid solution into his arm, Renton gasps and bows up on the gurney. And that's because all the heroin that's keeping him in the overdose just stopped working like that. And now he's got to deal with withdrawal. That's, his high is gone. It's just gone. This is a very good drug to have, in case of emergencies. We encourage, Lee College, the coalitions that I'm a part of, our partners in the community, all encourage first responders to carry Narcan. You might arrive, on the scene and need it. Some years back, one of my students had a relapse, and she took off with her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend, and they wound up doing some partying at a local motel in Baytown, and she overdosed. And her boyfriend and his new girlfriend, they got all their stuff and bugged out. And once they were clear and away from the motel, one of them, I don't know who, called the motel and said, in room 222 or whatever it was, someone's overdosed. You need to go in there and check on it. And so the hotel went in there, and sure enough, there was someone overdosed, so they called 911. And 911 got there, and the ambulance and the cops and all of that. And, but she was dead. And if there had been anyone, the boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend, the new girlfriend, the hotel clerk, whoever that had some nasal Narcan, maybe she wouldn't be dead. Now, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying that if this had been a possibility of an intervention at the time, she might not have died. And so we encourage that, people to have this. And my student, by the way, was 19 years old when this happened to her. It was a horrible thing to happen to anybody, but I'm not to offend anyone, but I consider 19-year-olds babies, man. Anyway, opioid replacement therapy and medication-assisted treatment. Things like methadone is used in opioid replacement treatment, as opioid maintenance programs, or methadone maintenance programs, rather, where narcotic addicts are registered. They become part of a program. They show up daily to take methadone, or sometimes they'll give you a week's supply that you can take out with you. And you don't have to shoot any heroin. if you're, or take any OxyContin or anything like that if you're doing methadone. Methadone's a strong narcotic in itself. And this is just about getting right and being able to function. It's not necessarily about being high. And so people can get on methadone maintenance and stay on that forever. As you know, the goal initially was you titrate the dosage down to where you get to a point where you can stop comfortably and then you quit. But in practice, it doesn't always work that way. And initially, in methadone maintenance programs, you weren't required to be involved with a counselor or anything like that. You just showed up, got your drug, and went on your way. Buprenorphine is a blocker agent. Suboxone, which is listed down here as a drug on its own, is actually a combination of buprenorphine and naloxone. Naloxone, and that will keep you from getting high, or keep you from getting as high as you expected to get if you do relapse, if you do have a relapse incidence. Naltrexone, naloxone are both also pretty good, and Suboxone are also pretty good at relieving cravings. But mostly what Suboxone does is screws up your high if you do relapse. MAT is medical assisted treatment, and that's the use of medications, and it usually involves all of these medications and then some more in combination with counseling and behavioral therapies to help people reach a stopping point, to titrate down. It's unrealistic to expect heroin addicts to come in like alcoholics and to AA and admit they're powerless over their drug and just stopped. It's narcotic addiction is a beast. It's not as bad as nicotine addiction as far as relapses, but it's pretty harsh. And I know plenty of people who have recovered and who are recovering from narcotic addictions who will be happy to second that motion, that it is a toughie. It's hard to stop. But if it was easy, they wouldn't need us, would they? In conclusion, narcotics, like many other drugs, can certainly be a problem, but they can also be a blessing. I have no problems with people who need the drug from taking the drug. I've lost a lot of family members to cancer, my father, my mother, my grandfather, two of my brothers. They've all died with this disease, and it's bad. It's an ugly way to go. I do not mind let me rephrase that. I would hate to be behind banning narcotic drugs if it meant that people who have those conditions can't get them because they need them. And if you have a terminal illness like cancer that's going to kill you, and it's going to kill you very painfully unless you have something to ameliorate that, then by all means take as much of the narcotics as you want to. I will not be one to stand in your way. But we have some problems with that. We also have problems with pain clinics. And these are the clinics that have sprung up all over the place, where it's like being run through on an assembly line in a factory. My back hurts. Here you go, Houston cocktail. My leg hurts. Here you go, Houston cocktail. My sore toes mortified. Here you go, Houston cocktail. What's a Houston cocktail, you ask? Some of you didn't, because you know already. But a Houston cocktail is where you go to get something like OxyContin or Vicodin, along with a benzodiazepine like Valium or Xanax, plus a muscle relaxant called Soma. And those three things will put you on your ass and keep you there for a while, you know, and people who are working the system will go there. And very often, I don't know, they've shut it down a lot. I mean, there's been a lot of shutting down of these clinics, but there was used to be on Interstate 10, down that corridor down there, you could go to any number of pain clinics, and you go see the doctor, and you do your copay, and tell the doctor what was wrong with you and what you wanted, and he'd write you a prescription, and you walked out of his office and across the hall, and filled your prescription at the pharmacy across the hall, which the doctor also owned probably, or had a stake in, and away you went. Now, you might want to use those drugs for yourself. You might want to sell them to someone else. People who were into pharmaceutical entrepreneurship would go round up folks downtown and take them to pain clinics and give them some money to go in and get their prescription, or pay them off with a few pills, or buy them a bottle of wine or whatever. And but the Houston cocktail is a benzodiazepine, a narcotic, and soma, in case anyone asks. Attempts to control narcotic use through law enforcement methods on their very, very best day can only be considered at best partially effective, in as much as you can't traffic in bus scripts and things like that while you're in jail, but they don't keep you in jail forever. And even if people aren't able to get drugs while they're incarcerated, which honestly they may be able to, you lock a drug addict up for 10 years, and when you let him out, within a week, sometimes within hours of being let out, he's back to his dealer. He's been thinking about this day for 10 years. He can't wait to get there, and start it all over again. Narcan is an effective overdose treatment. It requires no medical training to use. It will not harm the person it's used upon. And if you've got someone who's down and barely breathing and stuff like that, and you suspect a narcotics overdose, by all means, give them some Narcan. But by all means, also call 911. And, when they get there, have the guy checked out. If he doesn't respond to the Narcan, then something else is wrong. Narcan will not reverse alcohol overdose. It will not reverse overdose on other types of medications. It will not reverse overdose on things like crocodile, which is not really a narcotic. It causes some narcotic features, but it's a garbage drug that they invented in Russia among poor people who couldn't afford heroin. And it's the flesh-eating one that causes great sores and lesions and ulcers that eat the flesh off of your arms and legs where you inject it. Won't reverse that. Won't reverse anything but narcotics. So if you give them Narcan and nothing happens at all, you could re-administer the dose. Nothing happens at all is probably not a narcotic overdose. And that, I think, is that. And yes, it is. That is that. I'm talking a little fast when I do these things sometimes because it's raining at my house. Can you tell? But and a little moist out here, and a little bit mosquito-y too. So I'm thinking I probably need to get back in the house. And I can hear my cat inside the back door. That's, I don't know if it's picking up on the microphone, but I could hear her. So I think I'll call it quits there, and I'll see you in chapter 14 on the psychedelics. Bye.